the vision that Edgar Cayce had and the way he lived his life, that being together in this international conference is just one of the best ways that we can continue to foster his work. I think that I just wanted to share a little bit about me. I think that this conference is just it's been a joy to be attendee at these conferences for the last couple of years and to share with us today. I just feel like this is there's so much that will be blossoming and growing out of a gathering like this one, and I hope that we can all stay connected as we move forward, be it during this conference and afterward. This is a little bit more about me. John was kind enough to share a little bit about me. I just put this picture of my family of origin here when I was a very youngster in my dad's arms there in that upper left corner. And then the next picture there is a picture of me with my current family. I was born and raised in Seattle. My husband was born in Newfoundland, Canada. So we have a long distance connection from where we wound up when we were born. And my daughter also, we have a connection, global connection through our daughter as well, because she was born in China, and we were the lucky parents that were able to adopt her from China. So it's just been a joy to understand what it means to have a global connections through my own family. I love being a Cayce researcher, and that's a big part of my life as well. So I wanted to just share that, you know, I really connected with the Edgar Cayce work when I was probably a preteen, and I was going through a difficult time in my life. And I just felt like I wanted to put this picture in to remind me. I just recently heard this saying that you can tell who is a leader because each one of us has a piece of a jigsaw puzzle, but a leader is someone who shows us what the jigsaw puzzle box top photo looks like. And that's what I think of when I think of Edgar Cayce, because I just feel like that's the feeling that I had when I was first I've had a chance to connect with his work as a preteen, that I just felt like he was the person who showed me what the big picture was, what the puzzle box top looked like. And I think that sense of seeing the big picture through the Cayce work has really gave me the energy to keep going as a preteen, and I think it's really sustained me ever since. And I just feel like that's what I hope that we all can share and build on as we keep moving forward. I wanted to start with telling a story about Edgar Cayce as a child. He, when he was a boy, he joined the Liberty Christian Church in Beverly, Kentucky, outside of Hopkinsville, Kentucky. It was a very rural farming area. But there was a minister visiting minister that came to visit for a few months when he was a boy, who had lived for quite a while as a missionary in Nigeria. And so Edgar Cayce got to know him as a friend, as a part of the congregation. And over those months that minister was there, Mr. Cook, he said his name was, the minister, Edgar Cayce, convinced him to teach Edgar Cayce how to say the Lord's Prayer in the language of Yoruba, one of the native languages of Nigeria. And Edgar Cayce not only memorized it, but he wrote down the entire prayer in Yoruba in his memoirs that he wrote later in his life in his 40s, and when he was, as an adult. And I had occasion on a Facebook page a few years ago, an Edgar Cayce Facebook page, to connect with Toby, who lives in Nigeria, and I asked him, who speaks Yoruba, and I I sent him the text from Edgar Cayce's unfinished memoir, and I said, what do you think of this recounting of this prayer in Yoruba? And Toby said it was very close. It was an accurate recollection of how to say that prayer. So I just think that that's a fascinating story to start with, that even in this, we don't think of Edgar Cayce as being a global citizen necessarily, but even as a boy, he was starting off with, this fascination with connecting himself with another country, making a friendship in his own way across the oceans in the way that he could in his own neighborhood. He found a way to expand his horizons and have a sense of connection with people in another country by getting to know people in his own neighborhood. And I think that that's that sense of connecting with the work, the mission work that was going on around the world was something that Edgar Cayce continued on with in his life. And after he moved into the town of Hopkinsville, he started teaching Sunday school to other young men. And then he continued that through the rest of his life. He was a lifelong Sunday school teacher in Hopkinsville, in Selma, Alabama when he moved there, Dayton, Ohio, and then in Virginia Beach when he relocated there. And this is a picture, the center picture in this frame is his Sunday school class in Selma, Alabama. And he was very proud to keep track over the years, over the decades of his life after that, of how many of his students from Hopkinsville, from Selma, from other places, decided to give their lives to going into the mission field and lived in other countries because of that. And he, over the decades, collected numbers of how many people had done that he was connected with through his Sunday school class or through the Christian Endeavor classes that he taught. And over his lifetime, he counted 80 of his students had gone into the mission field and lived in other countries. And so that was a sense of connection that he had. He never had the opportunity to fulfill his childhood dream of becoming a missionary, but he instead sent 80 other people in his stead to build connections around the world. And Margarite Bro, who was a reading recipient herself and wrote articles for over many years about Edgar Cayce, she had been a missionary herself in China, and that was just a fascinating connection that she had with Edgar Cayce when they first met in 1943. And when he found out that she had been a missionary in China, that was the subject of largest fascination to him, because he just embraced the idea of making those global connections. And she said, you know, when talking with him, her comment was international mission work was his greatest concern in his whole life. That was just something that was really precious to him. And she said that, you know, she was talking about that feeling that people have when they pray. Sometimes people, it was very traditional at that time, and even now it is as well, but to pray, when we sit down to pray at a meal, or, you know, when we say our prayers, we'll say to pray for the people of this country or that country, whatever it is. And she said, when Edgar Cayce would say those prayers, that he wasn't just talking about a place, you know, China, India, South America, North America, Africa. He was talking about the people that he knew there. So that was her comment. She said places meant people to him. Every time he was praying for another country or praying for the world, he was praying for the children of his father, that he really embraced that idea that he was praying for the people that gave him a sense of connection with that place. I wanted to give you a sense of where we're going to go this evening with what we want to share about Edgar Cayce's global vision and how he saw himself and contributed to being a global citizen. I think that one of the first things that we really want to talk about is that it's really valuable to see how this Cayce work belonged at that time and even now to all nations and all races. I think that the work as we look at the readings and what they taught us and what they represented in the lives of the reading recipients, it helped us all understand that our souls are world citizens, that we don't belong to one particular country. Maybe for this lifetime we do, but our souls have been in places all around the world. The Cayce readings also give us this fascinating window into not only our own time, but times in ancient times as well, about that the sense of global connection is not just something that's come up because of modern technologies, but in fact, this is a theme that has run through human civilization, the work of our souls over time immemorial, that there has been a desire and a goal and a benefit from creating interchange among global cultures. And I think that we really want to pay attention to how God considers us all one family, and how that's our work, is to create that one family, even though there are voices of division, voices that try to separate us from thinking of ourselves as one family. I think that one of the things also is to remember that these themes help us understand that the work of spiritual growth is not just to be for our own benefit, for our own enlightenment, but it helps us understand that what our purpose is, which is to be of service to all and to help all reach enlightenment around the world for everyone. And I think that I hope that this message And this perspective on this work will keep us hopeful about the global future and help us sustain ourselves through the dark times that come up in the when we hear news that brings us down about the future of the world, that we can remember the importance of this work and remember our connection with each other and use that to sustain and grow our hope and help us have the energy to work to make it a better world. These are just some starting quotes from Edgar Cayce's, from the Cayce readings. These are the connections that I try to keep in mind. He wanted us all to live as brothers with one with another. There were no principles that rank above the brotherhood of man. Every color, every creed. That's what we need to remember about when we think of who is our brother. I wanted to share a little bit more about Margarite Bro, who's been a topic of great fascination for me over several years as I've been doing this Cayce research. But I think her insights on her friendship with Edgar Cayce helps us understand what his sense of global connections were. She was an author, published author, wrote 17 books herself, but she first heard of Ed Cayce when she wrote a review of There Is a River for a popular magazine at that time, The Christian Century. And she was so fascinated by what she read there that she made the effort to go from Illinois to go visit Edgar Cayce in person in Virginia Beach and stayed for several days. And then she wrote a very popular article about Edgar Cayce based on her interactions with him that was in the Coronet magazine. And that came out in late summer of 1943 in the Coronet magazine. And there was such an amazing response to that article. They said the magazine sold out. And that the stacks of mail that came in as a result of that magazine article about him were higher than Margarite was tall. She just, there was so many people that were fascinated and wanted to ask for a reading or ask for assistance from Edgar Cayce because of the power of her sense of connection with him from her interactions with him. But she also, because of this connection that she had with Edgar Cayce around his fascination with global connections and global mission work, she had an insight into how he saw those connections. And she actually made a connection between herself and Edgar Cayce and her own son, Harmon Bro, who wound up working with Edgar Cayce for a year in Virginia Beach, and as well as Harmon's wife, June Bro. But Harmon Bro wrote so many wonderful texts and insights about his time with Edgar Cayce. And he just said, it's really important to realize that, at that time, sometimes there were some people who went into mission work with the idea that they were saving souls from damnation, or that they had some sense of superiority over the people that they were interacting with in their global mission work. But that Margarite's insights about how Edgar Cayce saw this were very much, and Harmon saw this as well, that his sense of what it meant to be a missionary was to be of service, was to build bridges, to build friendships with other cultures and to make friends, build bridges, and to make those friends across oceans. There's a new book that came out this year that's also telling about Margarite Bro, and it gives us some insights into who she was, but also the impact that the Cayce work had on her. This book is called God the Bestseller. It's a great book. It's written by a religion professor who's been a New York Times bestselling author. And he came across the archives of this man on the right here in this picture, Eugene Exman. And he was the editor-in-chief for the religious department of Harper and Brothers Publishers. And because of his work, and he worked there for several 30 to 40 years at Harper Brothers, but over more than a couple of those decades, Margarite was at his side as his co-editor for most of the books that he published. And he had a transformational impact, the books that he published, on our understanding, on our cultural conversation about what religion means and what spirituality means. The author of this book, God the Bestseller, just came out in the spring of this year. He talks about the strong professional interaction that Margarite Bro and Eugene Exman had, and talks about Margarite as an extraordinary woman who was also Eugene Exman's conscience and his muse, is the way he describes it. And he, in the Exman archives that he was able to obtain access to through the Eugene Exman family, he said that he found that they had exchanged over 1,000 letters over the course of their professional interactions, and he just it's a valuable insight. And I just wanted to show you here by this picture the reason that Marguerite connected originally with Eugene Exman was because of her fascination with the There Is a River book and the work of Edgar Cayce. And so she wrote to him and said, maybe we could work on another book about Edgar Cayce. It didn't work out because of his passing in early 1945, but she built that connection and started working with Eugene Exman at Harper Brothers. But it was their mutual fascination with the Cayce work that really had brought them together. But over the decades that they worked together, look at who the authors were that they published. Henry Emerson Fosdick was someone that Martin Luther King looked to as one of the greatest chaplains of the century. Bill W., the founder of Alcoholics Anonymous. Eugene Exman was the sort of midwife for the 12-step books that Bill W. published. They were the early Eugene Exman published the first book that Albert Schweitzer wrote that led to his worldwide fame and later a Nobel Peace Prize receipt. And then he and Marguerite reached out to Martin Luther King after the Montgomery bus boycott and asked him to write his first book. And that led to his greater national exposure for him, later also recipient of the Nobel Peace Prize. One of Martin Luther King's mentors was Howard Thurman. We'll be talking about him a bit more lately, but his books were published by Harper and Brothers. Aldous Huxley and Gerald Heard. Aldous Huxley was the author of The Perennial Philosophy, looking at the connections and similarities between world religions. Gerald Heard was a wonderful mystic based in California who it's fascinating, the connections between Aldous Huxley and Gerald Heard and a group of people who were interested in mysticism at that time were just the subject of a Broadway musical last year. They were just very important in sort of cultural conversation around spirituality, psychic development, mysticism. Arthur Ford, a book that Marguerite wrote with Arthur Ford, really put mediumship on the map in the cultural conversation in America. And they also were, the Harper and Brothers were the publishers of really key introductory works in America, introducing Americans to Buddhism through D.T. Suzuki's work and Hinduism through Krishnamurti's work, who was also connected with the Theosophical movement. So tremendous amount of contributions to the cultural conversation around religion and spirituality because of these the work of these individuals. And the comment that the Stephen Prothero made in God the Bestseller was talking about the work of Margarite Bro and Eugene Exman working together. Said each of these authors that they worked with to create their publications, each of them had heard God's call as a mandate to make the world a better place, and each of them published with Exman. Just a really fascinating piece of how our cultural conversation has been shaped by the work of these people. Marguerite really recognized that interracial brotherhood was a key part of what we need to be involved in as humans. The day may be near when we will be overwhelmingly concerned with economic justice and interracial brotherhood for the conclusive reason that nothing else will be feasible if humanity is to endure. That was a comment she wrote in an essay of her own. And then the Bestseller author, Stephen Prothero, mentioned that the focus of Eugene Exman's books was a non-denominational voice, always with one eye on spiritual practices and another eye on religion in action. Very much wanting to connect our own spiritual enlightenment with how we manifest that in the world around us. I wanted to go on a bit of a world tour here and talk about how the Cayce work connected with each of the regions in the world. I put this picture here in the center about often when I'm in the meditation at the end of a study group meeting, this is the kind of picture that I see in my mind as we're praying, because I really feel connected to the work that each of you is doing around the world. And I just feel like we're points of light, and this is how we connect with each other. That as we get together in our study groups and meditate, we're building a neural network around the world that's protecting and blanketing the earth and energizing the earth in our love and light. And but I also think that what I want to show us as we go into the next few slides is how this picture sort of portrays our own soul's journey around the world too, because the readings just for so many people that received life readings got a sense of their journey around the world, that they weren't just children of one place and one time. They were souls that had a world journey through many lifetimes to foster them on their own growth and to help make the world a better place wherever they were in these different lifetimes. I want to start with Asia, which was sort of my first subject of deep fascination about what the Cayce readings had to say about a particular place. And my research into the mysteries of China and Asia just led me into this fascinating world that I hadn't really explored before, of what Edgar Cayce was talking about in ancient times, during that A.R.E. era that he talked about, that most of you probably heard about, when Edgar Cayce had a life in ancient Egypt. During that A.R.E. era, 10,000 years ago, perhaps, at that same time, there were highly developed cultures, he said, in the land of the Gobi, is what he called it, in far northern China, or in Mongolia, that there was a place there that he called the City of Gold. There was also another one in Southeast Asia that he also called the City of Gold. And then there was yet another in India. And all of these worlds were connected with the work that Edgar Cayce as A.R.E. was doing in ancient Egypt. But he told dozens of people that they had lives in these cities of gold in the Gobi and in Southeast Asia, and that they had cross-cultural connections at that time with India and with Egypt. And he said, in fact, it would be wonderful to excite more people about these conversations, about the mysteries that Edgar Cayce was talking about in these readings. He said, in fact, that there are cities of gold. It's still waiting to be discovered by people who chose to explore them in both the Gobi and in Southeast Asia. But he said also, this is just something that's really stuck with me, is that he said in the Gobi lands at that ancient time, there was a decision by that soul that finally became the savior, that became the master, the Christ, during that City of Gold era was when that soul made its choice to get on that life journey that would take him into that life that fulfilled itself in his life as Jesus in the Holy Land. It just gives you a sense of the power of the spiritual work that was going on in these ancient cities. Taking our world journey a little farther, going to India, the leader of the City of Gold in India was named Sinead, and he told, again, dozens of people that I think over 70, if I'm remembering correctly, 90, I remember here, I have it here, that they had lives in Sinead's India. And he said that Sinead was the defining spiritual leader in India during that A.R.E. time period. Sinead brought the unifying of the teachings that came from other lands. So he was part of this work to assemble and correlate the wisdom of all cultures. Even from South America and from North America, there were cross-cultural connections being built, the assembly and correlation of wisdom teachings. Was part of the unifying the teachings that came from other lands, from Egyptian and Mongolian lands, and from many others. He also shared in one reading for this woman who was told that she had a past life as Judy, the teacher of Jesus, that one of the sources of her wisdom was the teachings of Sinead. So that's a fascinating connection to think about as well. There's so much rich spiritual history in the world of India. He mentioned Australia in a reading. He said that he gave a past life for someone who said, a past life reading for someone who said that they had a past life in the South, in the Australian forces. I hope that means energy forces. He said where the Bushmen were first met by the peoples that came from Atlantis. So clearly there was some fascinating connections to that could be explored there through people who can dig into these mysteries, what the connections and spiritual wisdom is from even ancient times in Australia. He gave readings about people from Africa, people who had past lives in Africa, and of course we've all, I think, heard about the hundreds of people that he gave past life readings to who had some connection with his work as A.R.E. in Egypt in ancient times. He also mentioned that there was a period of time in A.R.E.'s life where he left Egypt and went farther south into Nubia. And he said that during that time, he worked with Hermes, the Nubian. Nubian is a African culture, and he said that Hermes, this is the original Hermes, and he said that in these readings that Hermes and Rata were the two collaborators who helped design and build the pyramids. He also mentioned that there's some notes from Gladys that are worth looking into as well, that said that their understanding was that Hermes was one of the past lives of Jesus. So just think that that's a fascinating connection to consider as well, that there's so much rich spiritual history in Africa as well that we can learn about from the readings. Again, many people were told that they had lives in the Holy Land and other locations in the Middle East, in Egypt, of course, in Persia. Many people were involved in a lifetime that Edgar Cayce had a couple thousand years after his time as Rata, when he lived as Nut in the Persian area, and people that had past lives in the Arabian lands, he called them, and in Turkey, where Rata had originated from before he migrated into Egypt to do his work there. The many people, of course, had past lives in Europe. There were reading recipients who, in their current lifetime as a reading recipient, had come from all different countries from Europe and wound up in America, or were writing to get readings as they by correspondence. There were certainly people that were told that they had past lives in all countries of Europe. People from all walks of life, royalty, soldiers, mystics, monks. Many people had wonderful connections to the spiritual work that was going on in Europe. I love this story. I keep thinking about it. That there was one time when Edgar Cayce was in Selma, Alabama, and he gave a reading for a woman who had written from Italy and asked for a reading from Edgar Cayce, and he proceeded to give the reading in Italian. Hugh Lynn Cayce and Gladys Gertrude had to stop him and say, "Oh, hold on just a minute. We have to go find somebody that can speak Italian," and somewhere in Selma. And then finally he took the cue to stop speaking Italian and give the reading in English so that they could get it transcribed, because their transcriptionist couldn't transcribe in Italian. So, but anyway, it just gives you a sense that of our global, the level at which our souls work globally, that we can tap into resources that can even give us talents in other languages. South America, I've recently been reading this fascinating work. Gregory Little has just been doing amazing work on the archaeological and mystical history of South and North America and the lives of the mound builders. I strongly encourage you to take a look at the wonderful comprehensive research that he's been doing on the readings that Edgar Cayce gave about the mound builders, and the actual information that we can derive from physical exploration of those mounds and the archaeological remains from those mounds. This book about South America is just great. It's a small book, but packed with information. But he mentions in there that 73 reading recipients were told that they had past lives in South America. And there's just so much richness to be found about the work, that the spiritual and work on the ground, creating wonderful structures that was done by the people of the Inca. The Nazca lines are just a fascinating subject to explore. How did these people create these great petroglyphs on the ground that went for such large areas? It couldn't be seen from the ground, but can be seen only from the air. Many mound builders in South America, and these even these spheres that no one can explain, that are just huge stone spheres that are found in Costa Rica and other areas, that are so many mysteries to be explored and understood about the mystical wisdom from South America. North America, of course, there were reading recipients that hailed in their lives as reading recipients from every state and from every territory of the United States, and they were told about past lives in modern times or ancient times in different parts of North America. Profound information that Gregory Little has collected in one of his newer books, Path of Souls, about the spiritual wisdom of the native peoples in North America, and how the people not just people interested in the mysticism, people interested in the archaeological evidence about the native traditions and native wisdom about our soul's journey, and how they're putting that together from the archaeological remnants of these thousands and tens of thousands of mounds that exist across North America. I really encourage you to take a look at that work and draw from the wisdom there that I have been so enjoyed. And then I just wanted to finish up where we are now with the International Cayce Conference, but there were many reading recipients that were from Canada in their current lives as reading recipients, or had been born in Canada in their current lifetime, and had come to the United States and has received a reading, and they had been told about incarnations in past lives in Canada. And I have to give a shout out again to John Chatat, who's making Canada just a really a beacon of light for doing this work of global connection through this conference and so many other activities. I wanted to switch gears a little bit and talk about the interchanges among global cultures. I was mentioning that there was these fascinating connections that happened during the A.R.E lifetime between the Gobi lands, Egypt, India, South America. Each of these people, I think that when you dig into this work, the readings about the correlations, that work that was going on at that time, it helps you understand that the people at that time understood that there is a purposeful position for each group of people around the world, and that we have to work on building that information together and drawing on the wisdom that we can get from synergizing the wisdom of all these different areas. Again, a couple thousand years after the lifetime of A.R.E, there was this time period in Persia where Edgar Cayce as Yult was the again a spiritual leader. It's here on this map. You can see it a little bit, but it's where Iran is now. But again, it was an era of interchange among cultures and a sense of global connection and sharing and correlating of wisdom. I think that it's really valuable to look at Edgar Cayce's own life and understand how, not only through the content of the readings, but his own life work as a human being, and through the choices he made around his readings, was able to build connections around that crossed so many lines that were unfortunately too prevalent at the time during his lifetime, lines that seemed to people were trying to draw around racial, ethnic, and religious differences. But his life work and in the readings and in his own life was about oneness. But this reading, just one that we keep coming back to over and over again, of course, as students of these readings. But the first lesson for 6 months should be 1, 1, 1, 1, 1. Oneness of God, oneness of man's relation, oneness of force, oneness of time, oneness of purpose, oneness in every effort, oneness, oneness. You can't get a greater emphasis on what he was trying to get us to focus on. And I think that it's helpful to understand how important this message was in Edgar Cayce's life against those tides in the world at his time that were trying to create divisions. And I just want to start with probably the biggest division in Edgar Cayce's America was the division between black and white. And I just want to take a look at how he tried to bridge over that wall that people were trying to build between black and white. You have to really remember that, in his lifetime, the years of Edgar Cayce's life were the strongest years of the Jim Crow laws, the post-slavery period when everything was separate, when there was separateness imposed on Black people by white people. And in the key years of his work, there was so much unfortunate popularity of the Ku Klux Klan. At that time in 1925, right when he moved to Virginia Beach to start the core of his work, there were 6 million Klan members around the United States. And there was a march in Washington, D.C. that drew 30,000 Klan members marching in their robes. There was separation everywhere. There was segregation everywhere. And this was the world that he was living in, but that he did not choose to participate in. he had a white supremacist father. And I think it's important I think one of the sort of untold stories about Edgar Cayce's life is how much there was a very strong dynamic of contrast, I would say, between him and his father, Leslie B. Cayce. Leslie B. Cayce was born, remembered the Civil War, remembered the times of slavery, and didn't end until he was a teenager. His family were slave owners. He was, as an adult, Leslie Cayce was active as a leader in white supremacist organizations. His work, when he was working as an insurance salesman, was for a white supremacist insurance company called Woodmen of the World. Hugh Lynn Cayce, in writing in his memories about his grandfather, Leslie B. Cayce, said that Leslie B. Cayce was fanatical in his hatred for Black people. That was his description of it. And he remembered that Edgar Cayce did not choose to align himself with Leslie B. Cayce's perspectives on that, and that he remembered over the years there were long involved arguments over the racial question between Edgar Cayce and his father. At the same time, Edgar Cayce had Leslie B. Cayce in his home for many, many years of his life. During his time in Selma, during his time in Virginia Beach, there were many years where Leslie B. Cayce was living in their home and listened in and was a witness to thousands of the readings. But this tension was very much a part of Edgar Cayce's life. I think about this picture that was taken. This is a picture that Edgar Cayce set up for a photograph, but it really gives you the sense that just in the staging of the photograph, that Edgar Cayce was living in the shadow of his father, and he had to deal with the strength of those feelings that Leslie B. Cayce had about of anger and of separation, of supremacy that his father was spewing, and Edgar Cayce had to live his life in response to that. Edgar Cayce gave readings for people, for Black men and for women. One of them was Jean Toomer, who was an author of in the Harlem Renaissance, artistic Renaissance, and there were other Gladys Davis at one point documented her list of people that they knew to be Black recipients of readings, and counted 7 others besides Mr. Toomer. She mentions that at one point when they were in Virginia Beach, that apparently Edgar Cayce's father had started this rumor among his white supremacist friends that Edgar Cayce would never give a reading for a Black person, that he wouldn't deign to use his talents for that. But there was one point where they were in fact giving a reading for a Black person when they were living in Virginia Beach, and Gladys noted that Edgar Cayce and Gertrude and Gladys were all talking about that fact. Oh, isn't that interesting? We're giving a reading for this next reading is believed to be for a Black person, with Leslie B. Cayce in the room there with them, and sort of making the point to him that his efforts to create false rumors were not going to be successful. This is another connection that Edgar Cayce built in his own lifetime. This is a man who's been fascinating to me since my childhood. I remember reading books about him as a kid. George Washington Carver, he was the man who popularized the use of peanuts and peanut butter around America, and I hope around the world, if you haven't had a chance to enjoy American peanut butter. It's just the best thing ever. But the man who made that happen was George Washington Carver, who was an agricultural scientist and professor at Tuskegee University in Alabama when Edgar Cayce was working there and living in Selma, Alabama. Edgar Cayce developed a friendship with George Washington Carver. He described him as truly a great soul. He was, in fact, a great soul. He was born into slavery, but gave his whole life to making the life better for African-American farmers, for farmers everywhere, but working on teaching the next generation of agricultural knowledge and developing tools and techniques that farmers could do to improve their lives and make their crops more successful. Toward the end of his life, when the Search for God books were published, and they were looking for people to endorse them as they made publicity about the Search for God books, one of the people that they sent the books to obtain an endorsement was George Washington Carver, and Edgar Cayce was very grateful to get an endorsement from him. George Washington Carver is just a hero of mine, but he made friends around the world. He was very prominently known in his time, a friend of FDR, who called him one of the most eminent figures in science. He gave advice to Henry Ford about obtaining rubber from rubber trees to make tires for the cars. He was a mentor to Henry Wallace, the Secretary of Agriculture for the United States, and later became vice president and a possible candidate for presidency. But Henry Wallace just thought the world of George Washington Carver. He was a friend of Gandhi. They corresponded about nutrition, and the Time magazine called George Washington Carver the Black Leonardo. This next slide is about Howard Thurman, also another great connection with Edgar Cayce's work. Howard Thurman was another fascinating connection with Edgar Cayce. They didn't meet, but Howard Thurman was a fascinating national figure who was considered a mentor to so many people in the American rights movement. And he also had a fascination with the Cayce work. Howard Thurman was someone that Life magazine called one of the great preachers of his time. He was the dean of the chapel at Howard University. He founded his own church that was a focus on interdenominational, interracial tensions in San Francisco. And he was also the dean of the Marsh Chapel at Boston University, where Edgar Cayce, when Martin Luther King was getting his doctorate at Boston University, so he described as a saint of the civil rights movement by John Lewis, who was a congressman who just recently passed away. Howard Thurman was someone who was also acquainted with Margarite Bro, and I'm trying to see if I can get onto my next slide here. Hold on. I'm going to just stop sharing for 1 second while I refresh my computer. I really wanted to get a chance to share with you the information that the many connections that Howard Thurman's work and Edgar Cayce's work had over the years. Sense of the work that Edgar Cayce was doing to the message from the Cayce work was so embraced by people who also wanted to build intercultural connections. I think that I'll try to get my computer to continue here. But the main thing that I want to say about the connections between Edgar Cayce, Howard Thurman, who was a mentor to Martin Luther King, who was, the subs were published by Eugene and Margarite Bro, but he. I apologize for the interruption. I'm going to continue to present while I'm restarting things here to get my computer to share. But I just wanted to continue on with the conversation about Howard Thurman and his connections with the Cayce work, because I think that it's just a fascinating sense of how Howard Thurman was connected with how it resonated for him, and it resonated for so many people that were involved with the Cayce work. Howard Thurman was a friend of not only Margarite Bro, but Harmon Bro, and many people over that were also connected with the Cayce work. And Hewlin Cayce invited him to come be a presenter. Unfortunately, the invitation came too close to the end of Howard Thurman's life when he was too frail to travel, so they weren't able to make the connection for him to actually speak at the A.R.E. But he had in fact visited the A.R.E. personally, and was able to build a connection with Hewlin Cayce at that time, and continue on to be friends with the Cayce work, and in fact had his portrait painted by someone who had been a reading recipient, Peggy Strong. And the Cayce information was just so positive about the importance of building intercultural and interracial connections. One of the Cayce readings someone specifically asked, what should be our attitude toward the Negro? That was the word that was used at the time. How may we best work out the karma created in relations with him. And the simple answer that came back from the reading was, "He is thy brother." Always think about the other people that people that are trying to draw divisions among groups of people. Remember, the brotherhood is the most important part of that focus that we should have. There were other forces that were trying to build divisions in Edgar Cayce's America, and they were included people who, the Ku Klux Klan was not only a force for creating divisions between black and white, but it was also trying to create divisions between people who were Protestant and people who were Catholic. There was a huge campaign for, again, anti-Catholicism in the United States in Edgar Cayce's time. That was part of the message of the KKK. And but that was not something that Edgar Cayce at all supported. And his life example was really showing that he wanted to build bridges with the Catholic people in his world and in his life. He made friends with the minister at the Star of the Sea Catholic Church, the priest that was at the church across the street from where he lived in Virginia Beach, and built that friendship even though there was a lot of skepticism on the part of the Catholic priest. He wanted to build that connection, and did make friends, but it took a long time, and Edgar Cayce was very grateful for that friendship. And then biographer for Edgar Cayce was Thomas Shigrew, who was a practicing Catholic. He'd been a roommate of Hugh Lynn Cayce's, but they embraced him. They brought him into their home for a couple of years, and he had the very strong sense that friendships across denominations was something that he wanted to be very much a part of. Edgar Cayce also, that in the United States that he lived in, there was a great deal of anti-Semitism. There were people who were creating very strong messages against the people of the Jewish faith. This was at the time when Nazi Germany was building its strong message of anti-Semitism, and there were people that were embracing that idea in the United States. And one of the examples of that, frankly, was Henry Ford. He was at the time the richest person in the world, and he used some of his money to create basically an anti-Semitic newspaper that called Jewish People the World's Problem. And but at that same time, when those kinds of messages were being circulated in Edgar Cayce's America, Edgar Cayce was someone who was building some of his strongest relationships over his lifetime with people of the Jewish faith, people like Morton Blumenthal, people like Edwin Blumenthal, his brother. The roof over his head and the food on his dinner plates was because of his friendship with Morton Blumenthal for many years. And that was something that was a really strong friendship for him. And his best friend, I think, through his whole adult life was David Kahn, who was also of the Jewish faith. And through the connections that David Kahn had, constantly recruiting people to come be reading recipients, over 200 people of the Jewish faith received, or Jewish heritage, received readings from Edgar Cayce. These were some of his key relationships, and they were building bridges across faiths. Edgar Cayce's America also was, providing, messages trying to build race divisions between other races besides just Black people, people of other faiths, and people of other nationalities. And one of those people was that Edgar Cayce refused to keep away from being friends with other people of other ethnicities. And one of those people was Bhagat Singh Thind, who was the one who had been told in his past life that he was Sinead, the great leader from ancient India. In this current life, Bhagat Singh Thind was a Sikh teacher and activist in the United States who actually had taken his case to the U.S. Supreme Court to try to stand up for his rights to become a U.S. citizen. Someone who was really passionate about trying to build connections between his culture and in America, and did it in some very high-profile ways like that. But this was a great friendship that Edgar Cayce made with Bhagat Singh Thind. Edgar Cayce kept a picture of him on his wall in his study, and invited him to speak at a Congress, at A.R.E. Congress. Another friendship that he made across ethnicities was Friedun Birdi, who was from India, but his family heritage was Persian. He was a Persian Zoroastrian. He was a mystic who had moved to the United States to share the wisdom of world mysticism with America. And he, again, he had been told that he was in past life Lazarus. And he, came to dinner and enjoyed hospitality of the Cayce home. And that was, again, a relationship across ethnicities. There was a reading that was given for a Korean American as well. So Edgar Cayce was building global connections everywhere he went through his whole lifetime. The human family is one family. And, the Cayce reading said that God has made of one blood the nations of the earth, and that is just such an important message for us to remember. And he specifically was reaching across faiths and all religions around the world. He said, whether in Buddhism, Mohammedanism, Confucianism, Platoism, or what, there is that same impelling spirit. That's something that we really need to remember. That Edgar Cayce, despite his, very deep Christian faith, was someone who saw the connections and embraced the connections with other faiths. The focus of his work was on oneness. He said, whether they be Greek, Jew, or Gentile, whether they be of Muhammad, Confucius, or even Shinto, or On, or Mu, the Lord, the God, is one. For all force, all power that is manifested in thyself is of the one source. He wanted us to focus on service to all. He wanted us to focus on enlightenment for all. He really saw that being of service is the only way that life is made to bring contentment. And he said, I really think that it's valuable for us as a group to think about how we can put that practice of service into our lives through our connections with each other and through our work together and in our daily lives, and whether we have the capacity in our lives to become global missionaries like Edgar Cayce wanted to be, or whether we just make friendships in our daily lives, or consider every action that we do in our daily lives about how we can help build on this Cayce legacy of embracing friendships across the oceans. And we can start with the golden rule as a simple start for where we think about how to apply this in our lives. This is from one of the readings, as ye would that others should do to you, do ye so to them. This is not merely a tale or an axiom, but this in action, the golden rule in action, creates greater actions of every nature. So as we start to implement the golden rule in our own life, that is something that creates other actions from all people, that creates an energy that goes out into the world and creates more goodness and more service in the world. We can do more to build bridges in our lives wherever we can find it, even if it's whether it's actually building a bridge, whether it's actually traveling to another country. If that's something that works in our lives, that's wonderful. But we can also spend time thinking about focusing, as he gave advice to one person, you can advance your spiritual growth by focusing on your study on what the similarities are in the teachings that are found in all the portions of the universe. We said, don't focus on their differences, focus on what brings them into unity. These will not only enable the entity to give to others, but in the giving, in the seeking, in the understanding, broaden, magnify the vision and the ability in spiritual things. His focus was on service, service, service. And I think one thing that I really keep in mind with when I think about the Cayce work is that we think about how we can put service into work in our lives. And I always hold on to that core piece of information that 14,306 times in his life, Edgar Cayce laid down his life literally for someone else to go into a trance, to give his all to that one person, to give them benefit in their life. What record can we create in our own lives to create that legacy of service? Whether it's one thing that we do for one person today, whether it's something that we can create build as a project through our whole life, what kind of record of service can we make in our lives to build service into peoples of all faiths, peoples of all walks of life that come into our world? And I just want to close with one story that I just was meaningful to me about thinking about how we can build global connections. But just this past week in the United States, it was the chance for us to celebrate our Thanksgiving holiday, which was really one of our biggest national holidays. And I had a chance to build some global connections that during our Thanksgiving celebration last week. I live in a little group of 4 houses, and over the years, my husband and I have been living here a long time, but we've neighbors come and go, and there's a family that lives in our little group of houses that's one family's from India and one family is from China. And they've each had daughters, and they're now growing up around us. One's 4 years old and one's 2 years old. And we had a chance to have them over for Thanksgiving dinner and build global connections that way. And, one of these 2 families we'd had a little interaction with that was a little bit of a strain to us. I think it left my husband and me with a little bit of hard feelings. So just a interaction that we had as neighbors, and we let it go. And COVID happened, the pandemic, and we didn't see much of each other for quite a while. But we reached out to build that friendship, to invite them over to Thanksgiving dinner, and their adorable pink daughters from both families came over. They were dressed as pink princesses and came over and had a wonderful time with my 16-year-old daughter. And they were just it was such a vision to see them twirling in their dresses and celebrating with us, and building connections. And I just feel like maybe there's one thing we can do. Maybe we can't go traveling around the world like global missionaries do. Maybe our lives aren't involved in international travel or work, but maybe they are. And if that's great, if that's something that's a part of your life, that's wonderful. If it isn't, there are still connections that we can build, whether we're going or traveling around the world or whether we're traveling across the street, that we can find, whether it's finding someone in your neighborhood that lived in Nigeria and taught us a prayer in the language of Yoruba, like Edgar Cayce did, whether it's building friendships across the street with families from other countries. However you choose to work on building global connections in your life, I really encourage you to do that. And I am just feeling so grateful for this opportunity to be together as a group, to have us be a part of that global connection that will help heal and protect and give hope to the earth through all of our lives, through the work that we each do in our lives. And I'll be a part of the meet and greet tomorrow morning for the next session that we'll be having as part of this Cayce conference. So I'll really look forward to getting a chance to know some of you there, and seeing how we can all brainstorm about how we can synergize from the work that we're doing in this this conference to energize our own lives as we go about our lives, but also work together to create something wonderful, to bring about a 21st century that is that will be a shining light and not a source of despair to any of us, but to help us overcome despair as we hear news stories of troubles around the world, that we can be part of the process of bringing light and life and hope into the world. So that's the message I want you to get out of the work of Cayce's global vision and his sense of being a global citizen, and how he inspired all of us to build for the future, build for a better world, and live our lives in hope. Thank you all so much, and I'm delighted to answer any questions people might have.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Carol Sue. Thank you so much. That was a really nice recovery, by the way. That was beautiful. Well done. Well done.
I apologize again. We'll keep going, John. We'll get it right the next time. Right? Get everything, all the technology to make to sing for us. So.
Are there any questions for Carol Sue?
One, thank you for a very prescient and very insightful message. I feel this message was directed at me because
wow. That's great.
I happen to be the only Yoruba here, I think.
You what?
I'm Yoruba.
Oh my gosh! Oh, that's so great! Oh, if you put your are you coming to the meet and greet tomorrow?
If it's going to be over Zoom, I'll probably.
Yeah, it'll be over Zoom. Yeah.
All right.
So
All right.
I want to get your contact information because I'll send you the prayer in Yoruba.
Okay, I was gonna say something about the prayer. Brother Keith Alvinson will testify to it. We had a conversation, and I was asking Brother Keith that has he ever heard of the incidents of Pastor Cook reciting the Lord's Prayer in Yoruba to Edgar Cayce? And he said he hadn't heard about it.
That's so
When you
great.
mentioned it, I'm like, there you go. This message was for me.
It was for you. That's why I
Yes.
included that story.
So-
I knew you were coming. So that's
So I was
so great.
I was gonna ask you another question though. Did you hear about any other thing that Cayce said about sub-Saharan Africa?
That's a really great question. And I wish, this is something, there's so many, our friend Paul Maza keeps talking about, the more you research in the Cayce work, you kind of find yourself falling down into different rabbit holes. There's just, it takes you down such a far way. You have to remember to come back up so you can research the next thing, but there's a piece of this that I'd really like to explore, but there are a few Cayce readings that refer to the land of Zu and ZU, and I just feel like, it would almost be interesting to talk to somebody who has some psychic talents about that too, because, there weren't a lot of people in Edgar Cayce's life, who were asking deep follow-up questions about sub-Saharan Africa. Do you know what I'm saying? And so I think that, but I really have this intuitive sense, I guess, I have a question mark in my mind about whether the land of Zu that he was referring to was sub-Saharan Africa. So, but I think it was one of those sort of rich cultures that were interacting with, at the time of Rata.
Well, I have a lot of questions to ask you, but I'll wait till I get your contacts to do that.
Yeah, that'd be great. And John, I'll give you. I'll make sure that John has my contact information, but we'll make sure to connect tomorrow during the session, and we can chat and make sure that we get each other's contact information.
All right, thank you.
Since we're on the subject of Africa, I've been in touch with Mohamed Kamara, who is the A.R.E president for Sierra Leone.
Oh wow!
Yeah, so I've talked to him before, and I've been in touch over email. Unfortunately, he could not make it with us this weekend. There was an attempted coup d'etat in Sierra Leone.
Oh, wow.
They restricted internet access.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
So unfortunately, he could not be with us this weekend, but we'll keep Sierra Leone in our prayers.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe we can have some time tomorrow during the meet and greet or during the rest of the weekend to include him and the people around him in our prayers.
Yeah, apparently they have, I think, if I remember correctly, at least 6 study groups in Sierra Leone. So
wow, that's great.
Yeah.
I just want to give a quick shout out to you, John, and talk about the fantastic work that you're doing to build these intercultural connections among study groups. Because I think that there's a few study groups that really would welcome having visitors from other countries. And so, if we can just, over time, as people show interest, maybe there can be somebody who's sort of a point person for making sure that if someone has an interest in joining a study group in the Philippines or in, Australia or South America. Hi, Cecilia, how are you? Yeah. I just think I just am so excited about that concept to, for us to, meet our brothers and sisters in other countries through connecting through a Zoom study group meeting. I think that's a fantastic way to keep this work of this conference going around the year.
Cecilia is from the Philippines. That's why.
Yeah. That's why I mentioned it, because she was so welcoming to make sure that people feel invited to come to be a guest at the study group there. Yeah,
I'm just going to stay for a while because I'm not in Manila. I'm somewhere in the province, and I don't know how long I'm going to have a stable internet connection, but I'll be back. Once I disappear, I'll be back.
Yeah. There, apparently there's unstable internet connections even in the United States. So
And I just want to
feel-
invite again, repeat the invitation of my study group. Anyone who wants to join our study group as a guest, even for just one day, will be so happy. I think Russell of Australia told the group before that he wanted to be one of the first guests next year, I think.
Great. Great.
Because
Yeah.
there's very little time difference between Australia and the Philippines. I want to thank John again because he was one of our first guests and we really had a great time. And our friends from California, Stan, who also joined us and facilitated one study group. So we're waiting for you, Carol Sue.
I'll look forward to it. I can't wait. That's going to be great. Yeah.
But the Filipino study group is a fantastic study group. I enjoyed every second of that.
Oh, we all love you, John. We really
Yeah,
do.
for sure.
And
For sure.
Stan too, and everybody in the group. Of course, they still don't know you, but thank you so much for having Victor that time during the Zoom meeting. It was really good. He really enjoyed it.
Yeah. No, it's grateful. I'm super grateful to you, and just the vibrations of your group are really high. So.
Oh, thank you. We hope to maintain it or even make it a little bit higher.
Yeah. You know, Russell mentioned the idea of maybe having twin study groups. So matching a study group with another study group, like from across the world.
Yeah, like sister study groups. That's a great idea.
I think that's a great idea.
That's a great invention. Yeah.
Yeah. So we can talk about that at the panel tomorrow at 8. There's a question in the chat for you, Carol Sue.
Okay.
Do a lot of Christians believe in reincarnation?
Saw that.
I think that there's probably there's whole books about Christianity and reincarnation that the A.R.E has published over the years. There's a great book by Herb Puryear called Why Jesus Taught Reincarnation. There's a book by Lynn Sparrow Christie, that's called Edgar Cayce and the Born Again Christian, and where she's trying to sort of correlate fundamentalist evangelical beliefs, doctrines with the Cayce work, and embracing reincarnation. I just feel like sort of the bottom line for me of that is, I just feel like the message that I get out of not only Jesus's teachings but Edgar Cayce's teachings is that God is love. That is the bottom line of everything, and I just. And I also, one of my sort of founding principles is that human life has value. Our incarnation on earth is for a purpose. And I think that if you combine those two ideas, that God is love and that human life has purpose, I think that a loving God, if there is purpose in human life, God would give us more than one chance to achieve that purpose, to achieve the meaning that human lives provide. So I think that's sort of the bottom line for me. And I think that, you can really see as we correlate belief systems between Christianity and other religious traditions, there is a huge opportunity for, seeing the wisdom of reincarnation teachings, but also how reincarnation teachings can be used and misused too. People can become too complacent about their current life to just think, oh, well, I'll just have a chance to try again. No, we have to be focused on doing it, the best job we can in this lifetime. But I think, we really want to embrace the love that comes from the message of Christianity and the love that comes from the idea of reincarnation.
Yeah. Reincarnation is the only thing that proves the justice and mercy of God.
Yeah.
And
I honestly think that was sort of the key concept that really drew me into the Cayce readings when I was a preteen, was just that idea that that God loved us that much to give us, not only second chances, but, potentially an infinite number of chances to get it right.
Yeah. My friend Antonia, she has a great suggestion, and she suggested that maybe just for the weekend, people can, next to their name, put the city that they're in and also
Oh,
the
yeah.
country that they're living in.
That's a great idea. Yeah.
So that, or, you know, if your city is a really long name, you can just put your country. But just to share, you know, where you're from. I think that's a great idea.
Yeah. I love that. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Carol Sue. That was
Thank you, John, for the invitation. It was great to connect with everyone. Look forward to seeing everyone tomorrow.